praying in the supernatural. So we're trying to understand the sovereignty of God, where we understand God can do more than we ask or think, but he always uses a person, and it's according to the power that works in us. So we've learned that God adds his super to our natural to make the supernatural. We've learned that God's super has already been deposited. Everything you could ever need for life and godliness has already been deposited for his design power. And so we need the partnership. We're learning actions. And so not long prayers. Prayers I'm interpreting as asking God for things, but commanding and ordering the sickness and telling things what to happen because we have authority. Your life has to be an example. That's an important. It says all you need for life and godliness. You've got to have faith, and we're going to talk again tonight about giving faith. You've got to, look at laying hands on people. Now, not suddenly, but, that's one of the things that's an option to do. And be thankful, okay? Even before the healing, and that change of attitude can also facilitate the healing. Well, we looked at God's will and praying God's will, but it's always God's will to heal. And therefore, we can ask with confidence, can I pray with people? Well, we've started to pray now. And I said, what's the issue? And like a doctor, we've got to ask for a patient history, ask questions. And I gave a list of particular questions that you could start with and just try and get some background to what's happening. And then speak to the issue. Take authority and command healing. Well, after you've done that, we want to review. Now, you've seen what I do many of the times. I ask the person, what's the pain level between 0 and 10 before we started praying? What's the pain level after? Now, it doesn't have to come down to 0. It even has to come down 1. Then something's happening. Now, even if it doesn't, I keep praying. But, this is generating faith. They're starting to think about, has it changed? And this is part of why we do it. It generates faith. Now, if they saw, felt, or thought about something, we command into that information. We follow up. We're believing that the Holy Spirit is speaking to them, or can speak to us or some of the people that we're praying with. Do a checkup, okay? Prayer clinic is all about checkup, and typically it would be the next week. Well, what if there's no improvement? So we're going to go on tonight. Consider a blockage to healing. Now, I studied a lot with what Henry Wright has written, and he found that even churches that believed in divine healing, where God heals, they only typically saw 5% of the people that were actually healed. And there could be reasons, but some of them could be they give up. They just pray once and they move on. And as you can see, sometimes we need to pray 3, 4, 5, even 6 times to facilitate the full healing. We get a partial healing, but not a full healing. And so Jesus said, heal the sick, not pray for the sick. And I believe that means we need to stay with the person until we see something and then do checkup. Or another reason could be they don't consider blockages. And that's what I want to go on to tonight. Well, the first blockage I want to look at is, am I the blockage? It's very easy as I say, you don't have enough faith. I would never say that, by the way, because it's my job to give that person faith if they don't. The first thing I've got to look at is me. Not before I look at anybody else, I've got to look at me. And so this is what Jesus said to the disciples. Then he went up into the boat to them and the wind ceased. Now this is happening. Jesus is walking on the water, or he's walking past them, if you read the full story, but he just fed the 5,000. And they were greatly amazed in themselves beyond measure and marveled. for they had not understood about the loaves because their heart was hardened. You know, we could say, I'm praying and I'm the blockage because my heart is hardened. He's talking about his disciples. We've got to consider, first of all, do I have a hard heart? And the Bible speaks a lot about that. And why did they have a hard heart? They saw what Jesus could do with the loaves and the fishes, but they didn't believe he could walk on water. They saw one thing, but they didn't believe another. And so we can believe God can sovereignly heal, but he can't use us. Or he can heal, you've seen many backs healed, but he can't heal something else. Well, our heart is hardened, or particularly, wow. And I remember Andrew Womack was telling the story about this. And he was praying for a man that was cross-eyed. And he believed that God could heal. And he just felt as he was praying, something happened. And he was about to tell the man that go home and maybe in a couple of days, you'll wake up and it'll be right. And he looked at him and his eyes were perfect. And Andrew Womack says, I don't believe it. And the eyes crossed back again. And so Andrew Womack was saying, I believed God could heal, but not instantaneously. And it was my hard heart as a prayer that actually caused the eyes to go back to the shape that they were. And so when we're asking God to heal, okay, God, please heal, please, it shows a lack of faith. We believe God can heal sovereignly, but we don't really believe God can use us in the process to see someone healed. There's still unbelief in us if we've got to continue. And that's why I'm stressing, I want you to command and make it short. And our heart may have been hardened. And so therefore we're begging God to do something that he's already done. And he said, I've already made the provision. You're already healed by the cross 2,000 years ago, but we insist on, please God, heal. Well, we shouldn't keep asking God for what he's already done. God has already provided his supernatural for healing. By his stripes you were healed, it says in 2 Peter. Okay? But another example is, okay, we can pray and don't ask for God's peace or God's joy. Okay? Why? God's already provided that. You will keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on you because he trusts in you. So I can release the peace of God, but God's already provided it. I don't need to ask God to give someone peace. The problem is they're not using their natural of putting their mind on him. And so that could be a blockage. Or I'm asking God rather than releasing, then I'm the blockage. Or in your presence is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore. Again, God has already provided joy. And if I don't have joy, then I'm the blockage, not God. You can have both belief and unbelief at the same time. And we looked at this before. I'm repeating this slide. So Jesus sent out his the 12 disciples to heal the sick in Matthew 10. In Matthew 17, the disciples couldn't heal the demon-possessed boy. And it says, because of your unbelief in the King James. Now, the NIV, I think, misquotes it and says little faith. If they've got little faith, they could have moved the mountain, they could have done it. So I actually believe it's because of their unbelief. And then it goes on to the father, and Jesus said to him, if you can believe, all things are possible to him who believes. And immediately the father of the child cried out and said with tears, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. And I think we're all in that situation at times. Now, I'm going to show a video tonight of Srini, and I was taken, and it was my part of my role to pray for his mother to get him back to India. And I thought she was more likely to die than to go back to India when I saw. But I had to believe and convince them that she was going to be well enough in a couple of 2 days' time to fly back to India, and she was. Well, we've got to consider blockages when we're not getting there. So we've the first blockage is us. The next blockage is the observers. Okay, they can bring down things, and Jesus kicked them out. Or what I try and do is I try and raise their faith. And again, that 1 to 10 of the pain level is aimed at increasing everybody's faith in the room. Well, we're going to just start tonight on what about the other person. And the point with God, there are two ways Satan attacks a Christian. Unauthorized access. Now, if it's unauthorized, okay, we have authority. But most people don't consider the legal access, which causes blockages to healing. Unauthorized means we have the keys. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Okay? We don't have to ask for them. We've been given them. It says what we bind on earth, what we command on earth, not what we ask God, what we command is bound in heaven. So we have the keys, but Satan is a thief and a liar, and we've got to use our authority. But when there's a legal right, Satan's a lawyer with legal access when we give him a key to the door of our life. And sometimes when we're praying for people, we're looking for keys. What's the key to open the door, or to lock the door in this case, I guess, to see the healing flow? Well, we're going to leave it here tonight, but we're just going to introduce the 6 open doors, or how does Satan gain legal rights? Okay, disobedience, unforgiveness, words of judgment, generational inheritance, emotional, spiritual trauma, and idolatry, including greed. And so we're going to look how we might use this to unlock if there are things. And we've started the process where we've done it once or twice, believing that there are no blockages. And if I'm not the blockage, then we start to explore, or maybe in your discussion beforehand, you already know there is a blockage and you're working towards that. So we're going to follow that up next week when we continue praying in the supernatural.